there are thousands of genetic tests that are out on the market today. There is no one perfect test. There's no one genetic test that can test for all possible genetic conditions. And so it's important when undergoing genetic testing for your team to understand what is the question I'm trying to answer and what is the test that will best answer this question. So when I talk to families, I use a lot of analogies. So just to break it down from the very beginning in terms of genetics, one of my favorite analogies is to talk about a recipe book. So our DNA is a recipe book. It provides instructions for our body to grow and develop. And so different genetic tests are sort of different ways of interrogating that recipe book. So in terms of analyzing someone's chromosomes, I'm making sure that we have the right number of books. Most people have 46 books. I want to know if there's any extra or missing books. In terms of genetic testing that looks at certain genes, genes are like the individual recipes that are in those books. So rather than checking how many books we have, I'm actually opening those books and I'm proofreading or I'm spell checking the individual recipes that are in those books. So those are some different ways that I explain genetic testing to families. And then even sort of within that scope, there's lots of tests out there. So I want to make sure that the families understand, first of all, why are we doing genetic testing? What is the test that we're doing? How broad is it? What am I testing for? Am I testing for, excuse me, one condition? Am I testing for multiple conditions? And then the possible results that could come back. So with any genetic test that we do, there's kind of three basic results. One is a positive result, meaning we see that there's a genetic condition. That allows us to formulate a care plan going forward. It allows us to understand the inheritance of that condition. We could also get a negative result, meaning we do a genetic test and we don't see anything. And that doesn't mean that the condition's not genetic. It just means that individual tests that we performed did not give us our answer. So it may be worth thinking about more testing. And it's always possible with genetic testing that we could get something called a variant of uncertain significance, which is sort of a gray zone answer. It's not positive and it's not negative. It's something that looks different than what most people have, but it's not either result. And so sort of that puts us in a place where it's a lead for us to follow. And sometimes it takes many years for us to be able to reclassify that and say whether or not it's the answer or not the answer. So these are interactions that I have each time that I meet with a family so that everyone feels informed before they provide consent for that particular test. Certainly there are situations in which families or providers feel like genetic testing is the best step. A lot of times that's sort of when we're up against a wall and maybe we've tried other things and we don't know what else to do. And so we think about genetic testing. Genetic testing is not always the thing that's going to give us an answer. And just like, for a heart problem, you would see a cardiologist, and for a brain problem, you would see a neurologist. If there's a question about genetics, you want to involve a geneticist. These physicians are specifically trained to understand the best tests to do under the best circumstances. And not everything is genetic. There are plenty of health problems for which we do not understand the underlying genetic problem. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, doing genetic testing may lead to more questions than answers. If we don't know what we're looking for, it's not a good idea for us to do a genetic test, which may only give us more questions than answers. Especially if we're in an acute setting, such as an inpatient setting, what we don't want to do is complicate the picture further or provide any additional stress to a family if that endeavor is not going to be fruitful. So genetic testing is helpful, but it's not always the best thing to do in every situation.